Hi, good evening. Welcome to Cape Charles Town Council Town Hall meeting for potential sale of our utilities. Can I get a roll call, please?
Buckholz present.
Holloway present.
None at present.
O'Brien present.
Let it be known we've established a quorum. Mr. Fulmer and is out sick, and Mr. Grossman is out of town. We're going to use kind of the same format as we used Wednesday night. Mr. Hose is going to give a brief overview of where we've been and maybe some comments from VAW. Then we're going to open it up for questions. Again, I'll encourage council to ask questions as they feel the need to. At the end, council will give some comments and thoughts if they feel like it's necessary. So with that being said, Mr. Hosey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and again, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking time out of a beautiful Saturday afternoon to do this. As the mayor said, this is going to be very similar to what we did on Wednesday night. We've got Virginia American Water here, Casey Allens, Vice President of Operations. Casey, you want to introduce your folks?
Yep. Good afternoon, Casey Allen. This is Barry Suits. He's our President of Operations for Virginia American Water. Dr. Christian Volk, he is our Senior Manager of Water Quality for the state. And then John Fiddler, he is our Superintendent of Operations for our Northern Neck Division.
Great. So, as like last time, just a very brief overview on process here. We actively engaged the public earlier this year in the January-February timeframe. Prior to that, we had gotten a couple of unsolicited proposals for this possibility. The council evaluated those proposals, selected Virginia American Water as the one to move forward with, and that's when we really started to aggressively engage the public, which was in January, February, March timeframe of this year. We put out a lot of information. There was 5 detailed messages that were put out. There were 2 town hall meetings. And we were able to get some feedback. So the way we left it was that we were going to take the input that we received and use that to inform the development of some concrete sales agreements, something that we could actually look at and evaluate. So the council gave me permission to sit down and negotiate those agreements with Virginia Water. Now that didn't commit us to anything. It just finalized what we were talking about, because a lot of the questions that came up earlier this year, we really couldn't answer because we hadn't gone through the step of actually negotiating a deal. So the documents are now final. They were published last Saturday. We have them right here in the back of the room. They're also on the website. And that's kind of going to be the focus of where we are now is looking at what this deal could mean for the town. The next step after this is because we're talking about selling actual town property. There's a process that we have to follow that requires a formal public hearing and formal action from the council. That is currently scheduled for next month on November 10th. So we'll be doing the appropriate advertising between now and then there'll be a formal public hearing on the 10th, and then the council will formally consider these documents. Now, should the council decide to move forward next month, that then starts a very lengthy process of working with Virginia Water to file for this approval with the State Corporation Commission. That's the main regulatory agency that controls all of this. And it requires their approval. And so until we get an SCC approval, this deal isn't done and we don't close. So there's still a lot to go. Why are we doing this? So very briefly, some of the 3 main reasons why we put the time and effort into looking at these unsolicited proposals. The first reason to consider this is to ensure that proper operation and maintenance of our systems. The second would be to improve water quality, because that has been the consistent complaint with our residents when we do our community-wide surveys about the services the town provides. That has consistently come back as the number one concern with our residents. And then third is to try and keep our rates lower than they would otherwise be if the town kept the systems. So those are the three main reasons why we really dug into this. Now, of course, there are some ancillary benefits. We would be compensated for this should it go through, and that would allow us to pay off all of our debt and have some additional resources to address other capital project priorities as determined by the council. So we spent a lot of time doing a lot of due diligence on this. We hired third-party consultants that are knowledgeable in the field. We've done our own research. We've done our own reference checks. And to date, we've not found any significant red flags with the proposal. However, we still need to hear from you. So we wanted to ask for your questions and be able to have the opportunity to provide that information. This is the second of 2 town hall meetings. And we got a lot of really good questions for the last town hall meeting. We didn't get a lot of additional questions for today's meeting. We have a couple of comments that were submitted, and we will address them. But we're probably going to go back and steal some of those good questions from Wednesday to go through this. Before we do that, though, I'm going to give a brief overview of what the contract documents say. So these are formal legal documents. They're not easy to read. So just give you a very broad overview of what the terms of the agreement are. First off, on purchase price. The purchase price will be the fair market value as determined by an average of 3 independent appraisals. We're going to do an appraisal, Virginia American Water is going to do an appraisal, and the State Corporation Commission will do an appraisal. It'll be the average of those 3 that will determine what the fair market value is. So it'll be the FMV up to a maximum of $15 million, and if the FMV comes in below $14 million, the town council has an option to back out. We'll get into all these in more detail as we get to the questions. Our current rates will be frozen where they are until Virginia American Water makes its next rate case to the SCC. At the next rate case to the SCC, Virginia Water will request that Cape Charles be brought into their fully consolidated rate, which is expected to be significantly lower than where we are now. Virginia Water is also committed to investing $10 million into our infrastructure over the next 8 years. Efforts to improve water quality will begin right out of the gate within the first 12 months after closing. They will also be doing an engineering analysis of the total system to determine what are the needs and where the investment is most needed, and they will provide a recommended priority list. The town council will have the opportunity to approve that initial list. Now, we only get to do that once, but that first list that comes through, the town council gets to approve that priority. Our employees, we want to make sure that we protected the town employees. So all of our current utility employees will be offered local employment with Virginia American Water, and they have a hold harmless provision in this contract that means that they will get no less than what they're getting now from the town to include comparable benefits. There was also concern during the public comments earlier in the year about, if someday the Lower Eastern Shore ever needed to regionalize, how would that work under this scenario? So we developed a process that's defined in this agreement. If another public entity like HRSD wanted to develop their own collection system and access treatment in our facilities, so there's a process to enable that to happen. Or any other public utility. Let's say Sheridan were to form a public utility and wanted to come in. there's a process to follow. You know, as far as developers go, that's already built into the existing tariff of Virginia Water. We also have negotiated a franchise fee. That's, you know, it's a franchise where the town would provide, you know, allow Virginia Water the exclusive rights to do this. The town would be compensated $50,000 a year, every year, for the length of the franchise, and we would get a chance to adjust that for inflation every 5 years. As some of you may know, we have been collecting money every time there's been a new hookup to the system. We've been requesting a facility fee that we have been collecting and been saving it in a separate account for future plant expansions. Virginia Water brings its own capital to this equation. So if this goes through, all that money that we've collected gets to stay with the town and can be used however the town council chooses to use it. And then there's also, we want to make sure there's ongoing communication between us. So the agreement calls for Virginia Water and the town manager to meet at least quarterly, and with the council at least annually. So those are kind of the main points of the agreement. You do know up on the screen, we did put a slide that we showed on Wednesday. This shows the rate comparison as we anticipate it will go. So the blue line, this is on the website for anybody on Facebook who can't see the screen on Facebook. It is on the website. The blue line is Cape Charles' current rates, and you notice it's a straight line. And you saw something similar to this earlier this year, except there was a third line in the one earlier this year. The third line was a projection of where we thought Cape Charles rates would go if we kept the system. Clearly, it would go up. But we had a lot of pushback about our assumptions, you know, about what drove the increase. So I thought for this presentation, just to make the point, if we were to come up with some sort of magical scenario where our rates didn't go up, they never would go up. We could keep them just the way they are. Even under that fantastic scenario, which is obviously not practical, we would still be better off on the consolidated rate of Virginia Water, which is the yellow line. Now, the caveat there is that SCC sets those rates, and we're not guaranteeing what those are, but Virginia Water will speak to it later. But I just wanted to be able to present that, and we'll be referring to this as we go through the questions. So, with that, I would like to start with some of the questions from Wednesday. So, so Lorraine Huckler, who's here today. Thank you, Lorraine. We're gonna review some of your questions again, if you don't mind, because they were good. So we're just going to start from the beginning now, because all the questions that were done on Wednesday were formally read into the record then verbatim. So we don't need to do all of them today. So what I'm going to be doing is I won't be reading anything that's repetitive, you know. And so we'll use this as an outline to hopefully cover largely the same information that we covered on Wednesday. So Lorraine's first question was on timeline. You know, what is the likely timing for the sale? Both an optimistic and pessimistic estimate of the duration to finish the deal. With the understanding the agreement's already been reached. So at this point, we have to get the council approval and then SCC approval. So Casey, you kind of gave the optimistic and pessimistic view on Wednesday. Can you repeat that?
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, John. So, you know, just kind of a high-level overview. If the town council decides to move forward with an asset purchase agreement. After that agreement is signed, there's a period where Virginia American Water and the town both get our own independent appraisers and engineering reports on the system to do an appraisal that would then be filed with the submission to the SEC. That timeline, could vary, and it's really dependent on the appraisers and the engineers involved. But based on prior experience, you're looking somewhere around 30, 60 days, maybe 90 days for that. Once the filing is made with the SEC, that process can also vary greatly. The town of Waverly, which was the first fair market value deal in the state of Virginia, took about 9 or 10 months, I believe, once we got it filed, all the way through closing. So that's, kind of a good estimate of what it could take, but that could also be longer. This is a little bit more complex than a town of Waverly. You're talking about two separate systems, right? A water and a wastewater system. So that time, could be upwards to, 12 or 15 months. But that's a good estimate of what you could expect.
Great. The next two questions dealt with the sales price, the maximum and minimum that was in that overview that I gave. The $15 million as the max price and the $14 million as I'll call it an escape hatch for the town. So the question wanted to know whether or not the SEC set the maximum price, and it didn't. That's the maximum price based on our negotiations that Virginia American Water felt that they could support and still do all the other things that need to be done with our system. The minimum price of $14 million is not a minimum price. It's not a line in the sand. What I wanted to make sure council had was the option. I mean, the FMV is the FMV. The fair market value is the fair market value. If the average of 3 appraisals comes in below $14 million, it's kind of hard to argue with that. That's the value of the system. However, if it came in significantly lower than that, I just wanted the council to have the option to review that and decide whether or not they still wanted to go forward. So that's where that falls. Lorraine's next question was on regarding the chart that's up there. What is the level of confidence that Virginia Water has in that yellow line up there? So I'm going to let them answer that.
I think the first thing I would say is John made a comment. It's really worth repeating. The Virginia SEC, they ultimately have the say on all things rates. They're our regulatory authority. They are who we go to have rates set. They review all aspects of our business when they do that, including operational expenses, things like fuel, chemical, power, labor. They also look at capital projects that we take on, weigh in on if they feel that they are prudent, and then those go into rates as well. So in terms of the SEC, they have the final say. We don't get to weigh in on that. But in terms of our confidence, I'll say this: our company has been in the state of Virginia for a long time. Over 140 years, somewhere around there. We've filed a lot of rate cases over that time period, so we have a lot of experience with the SEC. We also keep tabs with cases of other utilities similar to ours. And we have experience, filing the first fair market value transaction in the state of Virginia. So we do, have some confidence. And really, when you look at this chart, you see the yellow line. That's really, kind of our best guess on where rates will be based on, historical trends. One thing that gives us confidence that blue line will move towards the yellow line is that in 2017, the state of Virginia Senate passed a bill, Senate Bill 1492, that requires utilities such as ours to work towards a consolidated rate. And the SEC, when they're setting rates, they take things like legislation into consideration when they set rates. So in that regard, we do have confidence that Cape Charles will start to work towards our consolidated rate.
Great. The next question dealt with the current issues that we're seeing at the wastewater treatment plant and the concern about whether or not that was going to require additional capital to deal with that. And if that were the case, how would that affect the other requirements of like water quality? And what we explained last time was that the violations that are occurring right now at the plant are more process related. It's not infrastructure related. Therefore, it's how we do things that need to be, you know, tuned up, and it's not going to be infrastructure intensive. The other part of that was that Virginia Water will take responsibility for anything that's outstanding, you know, at the time of closing, and they assume our permits. Anything more detailed you want to say about that, Casey?
No, I think you hit it on the.
However, Lorraine sent new comments, a couple of clarification comments today. This I will read verbatim because it's the first time that we've heard this. Her first one deals with this question, so I'll read it now. Project priorities. Solving the recent violations in the performance of the wastewater treatment plant requires operational changes, not costly equipment purchases. I think it's important to clarify that Virginia American Water will be able to allocate capital funds to improve the potable water distribution system as one of the first priorities, an important priority for a subset of ratepayers. So, yes, I agree with that completely. Anything you would like to say about that?
Yes, I would like to address that one. So capital, you know, certainly is an important piece of the equation, right? And I completely agree with John's comments. You know, a company our size, we have the resources in terms of capital to address both the needs and issues at the wastewater facility and at the water treatment plant to ensure water quality is addressed. Deploying capital effectively is just as important, right? You can have the dollars, but if you don't spend it on the right things, or if you don't take care of the assets after you spend those dollars, then, you know, at some point that, you know, becomes a bigger issue than not having capital to begin with. Our company in the state of Virginia is the largest wastewater private company in the state. We operate in Northern Virginia, in Alexandria. We have 2 wastewater plants, as well as water operations in Del City and Prince William County. We have, you know, the water treatment plant in Hopewell that on a daily basis averages about 23, 24 million gallons a day. We have 20 or so small community systems in the Northern Neck. We have the capability, the resource, the knowledge, the wherewithal to make sure that, you know, the capital that we spend is spent on the right things. We spend a lot of time in planning. So as John mentioned, one of the first things we committed to in the asset purchase agreement is within the first 12 months of ownership, we're going to conduct a capital planning study on the facilities to help give us a line of sight on where the true needs are of the facility and where we should be focused on for the long-term health of the plants. Those types of things, along with other activities we have, allow us to do that effectively.
Great. Lorraine's next question dealt with concerns about the potable water distribution system and that the current system has dead ends and that there could potentially be health concerns with that to include certain pathogens. And we addressed that last time, but Lorraine had some follow-up questions about that I'm going to read now. Potable water issues. Regarding Virginia American Water's statement about the low risk of pathogens in potable water due to the low concentrations of bacteria and nutrients in the source water, the well, my experience as an expert witness for Legionella risks in one of the Flint potable water lawsuits confirmed that the concentrations of iron in the water is a nutrient for bacteria, including Legionella. The primary source of iron in Cape Charles potable water is in the wells. Legionella is a complicated life cycle. It requires a high life form that may exist in accumulated solids and exist in dead ends. I have worked with potable water systems that exist in manufacturing plants, and I don't understand how flushing the potable water distribution lines will remove the suspended solids and associated bacteria in the dead legs, or equally important, in the transfer piping after the water meter to the residents. If you have not tested the first sample after an idle period, i.e. overnight or longer periods, you cannot claim that there are no pathogens in the water. This is a reason that I asked if Virginia American Water planned initiate a voluntary routine sampling program of potable water at selected point-of-use locations to ensure compliance with the regulated drinking water quality standards and protect the health and safety of our stakeholders. So I'll let Virginia Water reply.
I think for this question, Christian, if you don't mind, I'm going to pass it over to you, and then I'll follow up.
So it's a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to answer most of it. So yes, you talked about Legionella and the Flint issue. So Flint is a completely different issue, so they made a treatment change. And basically it led to a major corrosion issue, lead corrosion, lead poisoning, and also we had some Legionella in the distribution system, and 10 people died from Legionella. So Legionella is an issue. It can survive in the distribution system, and it's mainly an issue in large buildings, and there you're going to have stagnant water, water quality changes, you lose disinfectant, and the Legionella can multiply. So it's an issue. And for this, to address this, if you check our website, we have guidelines to manage large buildings and the internal plumbing in large buildings. So I think we cannot compare Flint and Cape Charles. And Flint, they made a treatment change and it created the issue. Also looking at food levels, so Flint uses treated surface water, Cape Charles uses groundwater. And looking at the microbial populations, treated surface water, groundwater, there is a big difference. Treated surface water, you see much more microbial activity. Because one reason is food level. So you have a lot of food in your surface water. Groundwater, not as much food. So less of an issue as far as microbial growth in your distribution system. Something else, disinfection. So we provide disinfection. So the key, if you have a water pipe, you have bulk water, you have water in the pipe. If you have a bacteria, suspended bacteria in the pipe, the key is to have chlorine residual. And this chlorine residual is going to inactivate the bacteria, whether it's harmless bacteria or pathogens. So the key, if you have dead ends, it's going to be flushing. So flushing is going to restore disinfectant to control bacterial growth in dead end mains. If you have iron problems, if you have discolored water, call the water utility and they're going to come and flush. So they're going to get rid of the iron, and also they're going to bring fresh water with chlorine, so to provide disinfection. So as far as monitoring, so we do monitor various parameters. So every day we send people in the distribution system to check chlorine. So that's the key. Chlorine, it's easy to do. And basically, if the water smells chlorine and tastes chlorine, it's a good sign for us because it means the water is safe to drink. So as far as monitoring, we also do a bacteriological monitoring. So we collect water samples, we look for bacteria, and if we do find positive samples, we go back, we do investigation, we take resamples. If it's a if it's a tricky issue, we're going to involve the headquarters. So they have resources, research people, they can come, do additional testing. So we have resources to solve issues. In your text, you had a question about what happens in a house when you open the faucet and drink the first sample. And we discourage doing this practice. Typically for homeowners, if the water gets stagnant in the pipes, even in the plumbing of your house, water quality changes. So our recommendation is to let your water run for a few minutes to get fresh water from the main so you don't have any issues. It could be bad smell and taste. If you have a lead service line, it could be maybe a little bit of lead or bacteria, you don't know. So I hope I answered most of your points. Yes, Legionella, so it's a smart bug because it can avoid disinfection. It can hide in higher forms, higher life forms like amoeba, so some protozoa. So they go inside bigger organisms and they can survive disinfection. So yes, Legionella is a tough bug to control. Like I say, as far as concerns for Cape Charles, not as much. Groundwater, it's a small system. They flush, they have dead-end mains, and they have installed automated flushing stations, so it's a good sign to maintain fresh water and good water quality. So, like I said, to me, it's not the main issue in Cape Charles. They have other issues. Legionella, yes, it can be an issue. It has been an issue in other water systems. It's going to be an issue in big cities using chloramines with big buildings. Small systems using groundwater, not as much of a risk.
I may make one comment. Thank you, Christian. I thought that was pretty comprehensive. One thing that I wanted to point out to make sure everybody understands is, American Water doesn't, nor Virginia American Water for that matter, have anything to do with any operations in Flint, Michigan. So we're aware generally of what's going on there, but we are not the service provider and we don't have any operations there. And the one other thing I think that I thought of is, Christian kind of alluded to it, but you may not have caught that's a little different than even what you have currently, or what Flint had, is we can't make a change in how we treat the water without our corporate R&D group approving that change. So it's a second level of oversight beyond the regulator, right? Beyond the environmental regulator in the state. So at American Water, if we want to make a change on how we treat water, if our local operations thinks there's a better way to do something, they have to make that proposal that we have to get approval from our corporate. You reference that, but I want to make sure people understand that that's a second layer of oversight on how we treat the water. So we're very careful about any kinds of changes in how we treat water. It takes multiple review and approvals.
So you kind of took my main talking point about that, the treatment change. But, I'll expand on that a little bit. When Barry says, corporate approval from the R&D group, there is a team of very smart folks, engineers, water quality experts, environmentalists, our local teams. And essentially what they do is if we want to propose to make a treatment change, and that could be the case in the town of Cape Charles because we're committed to improving the water quality. I mean, we're going to look at the chemicals being used. We're going to see if there's better alternative, better dosages. So we might make a change here, but before we make a change, even before we submit the permit to the state to do that underneath the normal process, we will take water samples, from the source to supply. We grab them out into the distribution system. We basically do a period of 9 months testing, I think is the last one we did in Hopewell. where they'll check things like corrosivity and see if there's any negative interactions between the current chemicals and the new chemicals, because there's a period of time when you change chemicals that you have a blending effect, and it can have a negative impact that Christian described that happened in Flint. The other thing, from an operations perspective, Christian's absolutely right. His team does a lot of work out in the field taking samples. My team, from an operations perspective, does as well. So when we're out there repairing water leaks, doing work at the meters, flushing activities, all of our field service reps and our technicians, they will grab chlorine residual testing. And I think one of the things that distinguishes us from a lot of other utilities is it's one thing to grab a chlorine residual and see, okay, yeah, there's chlorine there, and check the box and move on. We capture that data, so when a technician is out there, we input that into the system, which it then puts it into a GIS format, so we can see chlorine residual trends in the system that helps us identify issues that might be indicative of a dead-end system. To be a realist, systems change from the time that they're designed, so, when there's a water leak, you have several people going out to turn valves off. Repair leaks. Sometimes it's a different crew restoring water service. There might be a valve left off. That type of technology helps us identify flow issues in the system that might be from an accidental valve being closed. But there's certainly a lot of effort that goes into ensure that type of testing is done in our operations.
Okay. All right. The next question dealt with just a clarification about the initial priorities that the Virginia Water would do, and whether the council's authority was to approve or to advise. And I just want to clarify, it was to approve. Also, there was a question about having how do we coordinate or have an interaction with any expansion of the system outside the current system. And again, I think we have that ongoing communication every quarter, every year. I mean, there will be ongoing communications with Virginia Water, so we can coordinate what they doing, what they're intended doing. But then again, anything has to go through the SCC. So the town always has the opportunity to participate in that process and weigh in positive or negative with regard to that. Question about the franchise fee. What is the purpose of the $50,000 franchise fee from Virginia's perspective? What's the basis for determining the amount, and how will the town spend it? And again, it's a revenue line item that the council will determine every year. One council can't bound another, so every year the council will determine how to spend that money. The basis, frankly, was a negotiation. It was one of the things we sat down and negotiated, and that was the amount that worked best for both sides. And regarding the purpose, do you want to cover that again, Casey, of the franchise fee?
So essentially with the franchise agreement, that is a document that we establish with the town, an agreement that gives us basically the exclusive right. It grants us the ability to operate, the water and the wastewater utilities in the town. So that purpose of that fee is to compensate the town for those privileges that are asserted through the agreement.
Okay. And the rest of it was again about how we're spending money, and again the council will make those determinations at those times. Moving on to some other questions, we got, it was regarding water quality improvements, and the question was they're going to invest $10 million over 8 years, and the town council gets to approve the initial priority. However, the concern or question was, what happens after that? How does the town ensure that that water quality remains at the top of the list? And again, there is that ongoing communication that we have, but also, and I'm going to turn it over to Casey about the regulatory requirements and all of that, but the part that the agreement does cover is it covers the initial improvements that need to happen that will improve quality. But those don't go away. Once they're done, they're there. They're not going to undo them. So that's how we ensure the water quality is there, because we're forcing it up front. Casey, you want to add to that?
Yep. No, John, you're correct. So the initial investments that we make, especially the large investments that we make, are going to be based on that capital planning study that's going to identify the important projects to, address things like water quality, but also ensure that, we have sustainable operations. A lot of those will be done at the plant, and those, once those are put in place, those benefits are there. From that point, in addition to our capital that we spend on large investment projects, every year, every one of our operations has capital that's specifically set to address things in the distribution system, and then ongoing smaller capital needs at the plant. So even if you're putting out the best water quality at the plant, if your distribution system is not healthy, and things like corroded water or sediments in water become an issue. So we're going to have ongoing capital to replace water lines that are aged beyond their useful life, address problematic areas that, see a lot of water leaks. Water leaks can stir up water issues and create, issues themselves. We have capital designated just for replacement of service lines. So individual homes and businesses that might have older galvanized lines that tend to, corrode up, which restricts the flow that can go through the lines, but also contributes a lot to discolored water issues. Those types of things are addressed. So that type of regular proactive capital is something we do today in all of our systems, and we're committed to doing that for the town of Cape Charles.
Okay. The next question dealt with the pace of improvements. You want to just keep the floor and talk about that?
Yes. I made a comment in Wednesday's session, and I'll say it again because it's absolutely true. And, it helps, I think, when we can use examples for how our company has done something similar like this in another town for another community. And I mentioned earlier, we recently partnered with the town of Waverly and acquired their water system. And some of the first comments that, we got initially after partnering with the community after the close of the sale was they felt like the cavalry had come to town. They had never seen so many resources come to bear to address the issues that they've been facing for a long time. I mean, we had a significant presence of our employees from the Hopewell District that support that. We brought in a lot of contractor resources. We made a lot of upgrades right off the bat to their well systems to improve things, water quality, and increase monitoring. They are also a community that is right on the limit, if not exceeding their withdrawal limits from DEQ, which is also an important matter here for the town of Cape Charles. A big part of our focus there was addressing leaks. So within the first month or two of ownership, we fixed upwards of 40 or 50 leaks. Our impacts on non-revenue water right from the bat have been tremendous. I'll give you kind of an initial metric of that. When we took over ownership of the system, their well was running about 12 or 13 hours a day, which was over 50% of its capacity. Today, I just got the report on the well. We get it every day. They're running under 6 hours a day. So some of that is seasonal, but the majority of it is focusing in on addressing leaks and being good stewards of the water. We also found, folks that were coming in and illegally hooking up to the system. All kinds of things contributed to that. But when you ask about the pace and how fast these things will, start to be seen in the town of Cape Charles, it will be immediate. It'll be significant. Fast.
And as I said earlier, the agreement itself requires certain action. The water quality, for example, has to begin within the first 12 months. And then the study will start immediately as well. The second part of the question was, is the town obligated to provide land or any other type of investments should Virginia Water find it necessary to expand facilities in the future? And the answer to that is no. The town is not obligated to do any such thing. I will say that the land that is being conveyed now with the sale allows for future expansion. So, however, should anything else be required, that's something Virginia Water would have to approach us on separately. The next question wanted a simple financial summary. I thought this was a good question. I wanted to cover this again. So the sales, they asked about the sales price, and we've already covered that. That's that FMV between the three appraisals. They wanted to know, what is the current debt associated with the water sewer facilities that would be paid off from the proceeds of the sale? And currently, that's just over $4.8 million. Then they wanted to know, what is the other debt unrelated to the water and sewer that would also be paid off, and that's at just about $1 million. So including prepaids and some other things, the total debt that we would be paying off with any proceeds would be $5,886,000. That would be the total amount. Are there any other obligations associated with the current operation that will need to be covered using the proceeds of the sale? And the answer to that is no. And what is the account balance of the reserves that would be freed up? I'm assuming this is referring to the facilities fee connection. So as I think I mentioned before, right now, when someone hooks up a brand new connection, we charge them a facility reserve fee, and what that is it's a chunk of money that we just put aside and we save for future plant expansions, and that money would be retained by the town, and what he's asking for is how much is that, and currently that's $2.6 million. The next question here was about the rates. He wanted to know what the current rates are, the estimated rates at closing, estimated rates. The estimated rates for the town at closing, the estimated rates of Virginia Water at closing. So that goes to the chart. So the chart shows what the current rates are. At closing, they'll still be the blue line, because we're going to freeze them there. And then Virginia rates at closing will be what they are, what their current tariffs are, and what are the Virginia Water consolidated rates would be at the time of closing. So there's some nuance to this that maybe you want to handle about the rate cases and getting to consolidation.
Yep, absolutely. So, and I'm going to use this chart just to kind of help the talking points. So as John said, the blue line is the town's current rates. The yellow line is kind of where we're at today, and where, based on historical trends, we kind of see things trending in the future. There's a lot to go into that, so those numbers can change. They're not definitive numbers, but our proposal defined in the asset purchase agreement is, through the closing process, if the town decides to move forward, when the transaction closes, we're committed to keeping the town of Cape Charles rates where they're at today. So your water bill that you're receiving today, your wastewater bill that you're receiving today, it does not change. At our next rate case filing, we would file the rate case proposing to bring the town of Cape Charles immediately into our consolidated rates. So that legislation that I'd referenced earlier that was passed in 2017, we have been on a cycle since then, consolidating the rates amongst all of our operating areas into one. Our first rate case following that legislation, we had moved 1/3 of the way towards consolidation in all of our districts. Now we took that to mean that the next rate case would be 2/3, and then the final full consolidation would be at the third rate case. Again, with the SCC, there's no guarantees. There's always a lot of input from various stakeholders, town elected officials, customers, things of that nature. But we feel even more confident with that. We recently filed a stipulated agreement in our current rate proceeding that we're in right now that kind of solidifies that second thirds of consolidation. So theoretically, in the way that we see this going, is that at our next rate case, which would be the first rate case following the closing, it will be our final step towards full consolidation for the entire state. So that would be that yellow line, and we are going to propose to bring the town of Cape Charles into that rate immediately. Again, a lot of discretion with the SEC, so there's not a guarantee with that, but that's what we're going to file for, and that's kind of what we're projecting.
And so I thought maybe this would be a good time to explain consolidation in a little bit more detail. I did this on Wednesday night too. We talk about these consolidated rates, and I just want to make sure everybody understands what that means. So until this legislation that Casey spoke of a few years ago, each service area had its own rate and was based on the costs for that area. So the cost of service, the capital investments there, that all got divided by the number of users. That's your rate. So clearly, if you're in a much larger community with a lot of users, and then you could spread that out over a lot of people, your rates are pretty low. If you're in a smaller community where you don't have a lot of people to spread the costs over, the rates tend to be higher. So you can have a lot of rates all over all over the state. Some of them are really down here, some of them are up here, some of them are over here. And what that legislation is doing is it's going to force them all together. So whether that's a good piece of legislation or not depends on which area you're in, I guess, right? So if you're in an area now that has lower rates, yes, your rates are going to come up. Okay, they're going to come up to the consolidated area. And what we've seen is we've seen some comparisons to what's happening to some of these larger communities, whose rates are going up, and the concern was that was going to happen to us. But you can't look at just the larger communities. You have to look at Virginia American Water's, all of their communities, including the smaller ones with rates that are higher, like the Eastern region. The Eastern region rates have come down, just as we're projecting ours to come down, because our rates are up in that area too. So that's what consolidation means. I just want to make sure everybody understands what that is. And the communities do get involved and do have an input. When this consolidation first happened, larger communities that were going to have to have rates increase, they were concerned, of course. Their public officials got involved, as they should, and they approached the SEC and said, well, you can't do this real quick. They wanted time to spread this out, absorb it. So the SEC said, okay. So the local community did have an impact, and they got it pushed over 3 rate cases instead of forcing it all in one. And as Casey was referring to, they're finishing up the second one now. The third one should get to a line very similar to the yellow line that we see up there. So I just wanted to make that clarification of what consolidated rates mean, and that you have to really look at all the situations. You can't just cherry pick one and compare that to everybody else. It's really not the same thing. And because our rates are so high, right out of the gate, Cape Charles would likely would benefit from it. Also, what I shared on Wednesday night as a point of comparison, there's a study put out by the Draper Aiden Associates. They've been doing it for over 30 years. This is a survey of all municipally owned systems. These are not private companies like Virginia Water. These are municipally owned systems like Cape Charles. Of all the systems statewide, and they track what the average costs are. And over a 10-year period across the state for municipal services, over a 10-year period, water rates have gone up about 3.5% a year, and sewer rates have gone up about 4% a year. So that line up there, that blue line that's level, is clearly unrealistic, right? Even if we just maintained the statewide average and we started sloping up, you see we begin to parallel the yellow line. The yellow and blue line will never capture. We'll never be able to be as low as that yellow line. Right now, we're not doing so great in this study. This shows, because obviously our rates are in here. It's a list of public utilities like ours. Right now, our current rates, are 39% above the statewide average. So we're not doing a great job with our current rates. And it's important to have all those pieces of information when you're considering this.
John, I'll
Good.
expand on that a little bit. I think I think when anyone hears any cost of anything increasing, it's not a comfortable thing, especially in the period that we're in with inflation. But the reality of it is, you know, the water and wastewater assets, and many of which are not visible, right? We're talking about pipes that are under the ground that you can't see. It's no different than other assets that we have, like a vehicle. When you build a plant and you put in a water line, those things, you know, get old and they deteriorate over time. And one of the things that I see, you know, it's often a quick win for some communities in a short term, but it's often their detriment in the long term. It's very easy for a community water system to decide that, you know, hey, we've got this water plant, new pipe in line or in the ground, you know, we're going to let it ride, you know, for as long as we can. And they keep rates for their constituents as low as they can for as long as they can. And eventually what happens if you're not proactively investing in those assets, you start to experience things like water leaks. You start to experience things like equipment failure. And the cost of then replacing those assets, you know, becomes even more expensive because it's a lot more costly to replace a main in the middle of the night and deal with the insurance and the damage and stuff that it incurs than it is to proactively replace a water line. So we try to do the investment, you know, in a way that, you know, doesn't result in a period of holding rates flat and then large increases to address, you know, to be forced to address those emergent issues. We try to do it in a way that keeps up with the investment that's needed to sustain the long-term operation of the plant. And, you know, I made this comment the other day. I mean, when you look at an operation the size of the town of Cape Charles with the number of customers that you have, you know, it would be difficult, if not impossible, for us as a company to come in and make the type of investments that, you know, we're proposing to do with the customer base that's here alone. That's where the size of our company comes into play to benefit, you know, not only potentially the town of Cape Charles customers, but all of our customers benefit from that, quite frankly. Even our largest community that we serve, the town of Alexandria, you know, they're just a third, so they get the benefits of 2/3 more customers in the state, you know, that provide that same protection. So I wanted to make that comment because it's not anything that the town's doing wrong. It's just kind of the nature of the way that you're set up here.
All right, and then the last question here that Sam Jones provided last Wednesday had to deal with the annexation agreement. The question was that there's only one reference to the annexation agreement in these sales agreements, and what it says is that this deal doesn't go to closing unless there is a satisfactory resolution between the town and Preserved Communities, aka Bay Creek, with regard to the developer's liability under the annexation agreement. Now that's a complex topic, and I just wanted to kind of make it clear that there are two different discussions or two different negotiations. And in order to address the issue with the annexation agreement, we needed hard data. It's not something we could just sit down and do off the fly. So we put in an engineering study in the field to do a capacity analysis and cost estimates and get all the data that we needed to sit down with Preserve and try and figure out what are these liabilities. Let's quantify them, and let's just see what options we have to resolve them. That study took way longer than we expected and just resolved literally a week or two ago. So we have not had significant discussions with Preserve yet. Those discussions are just now starting, but we can move forward with this discussion because we have that out. The only part of this that Virginia Water is involved in is that they agreed to this stipulation of the agreement that the deal doesn't close if we don't have a satisfactory solution with Preserved Communities. So there'll be much more coming on that later, and we'll have public meetings on that, and you'll have the opportunity to review anything that we're talking about and comment on it. But for now, we're kind of bifurcating those issues. And then Jim Metz sent a couple questions on Wednesday as well, and that was, you know, he reiterated, you know, the top three things that I said, the main three reasons why we're considering this, and he wanted to know, well, what's the mechanism for measuring Virginia Water's performance, and what remedies are specified, should they not do these things. And this is a contract, it's a legal agreement, and just like any other contract, if one party breaches it, you look at your options for legal action. That would be one avenue. But depending on what it is, there's also regulatory safeguards. I'll let Casey address that.
Yep. Thanks, John. I mean, you kind of pointed out with these agreements, there are several provisions in there, including the franchise agreement, right, that kind of calls out some of the things that we're agreeing to and levels of service that you would expect. Like the town, we are regulated in the sense that, the federal drinking water standards apply to us. Any state drinking water requirements through the Virginia Department of Health applies to us. DEQ requirements on the wastewater plant, as well as the withdrawal aspects of the plant, they apply to us. So those are also things that the town is subject to. In addition to that, we talked a lot about the regulatory environment that we have with the Virginia SEC. That's another entity that holds us accountable, that also sets service expectations for us. That's another avenue for the town to pursue in comments and formal action if there were any issues or concerns about the levels of service that we provide. One thing I will kind of point out, though, I think it's one thing for us to come in and say, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to invest, we're going to make sure that customers are happy, we're going to ensure that customers don't complain, we're going to maintain environmental compliance. And I feel confident in saying those things, but it's another thing to be able to tell you, don't just take what I say, at face value. Look at our record. And I mean, when you look at our record with our environmental compliance, the NOVs, I think that the town is facing right now for just the one wastewater plant, right? You've got 3 or 4 NOVs just this year. I talked about our operations in general, right? We operate all across the state. We have multiple plants. We have 2 wastewater plants that are much larger than the town of Cape Charles plants. We have several small community water systems, well systems, similar to the town of Cape Charles, that are a lot more intensive on maintaining compliance with withdrawal permits that JR is very familiar with. We've not received any NOVs for any of those operations, including, newly acquired system of the town of Waverly this year. We didn't receive them last year. We didn't receive any NOVs the year before that. It's been many years since we've received an NOV. It's before Barry has even gotten here in 2017, so I don't even know the exact date that we got a last NOV. That is our record. When you look at customer service, one of the things that I'm very proud of, and Barry holds me accountable to this every day. If a customer, calls and expresses a concern to Mr. Suits, I hear about it the same day and it's addressed. We have very little complaints at the SEC. Those are public. You can go on and look at those. I think, this year alone, out of the total 83,000 customers that we have in the state, we've had, 8 complaints at the SEC, and I don't think any of those were service related, right? Some of them are issues that we don't have control over. It's entities besides ours that they kind of misconstrue because of neighboring utilities or things that they stimulate with our business. But we have a great record. Even in our rate filings, if you go back and you look at the comments that have been made from customers, both large and individual customers, you don't see the type of complaints that some other utilities in the state have. So we have a very good record in that aspect, and I just wanted to offer that kind of perspective because it backs up that we are going to be able to do the things that we're committing to the town of Cape Charles.
Another really valid point that Jim brought up in his questions for Wednesday was about one of the concerns about selling is turning assets over to a private company, and one of the assets that that would be going over was the names and addresses of all the utility customers, essentially a town directory. and I wanted to know if there was any consideration about retaining that. And as I conceded on Wednesday, I really hadn't given that a lot of thought, and that's a really important point because we use that directory all the time. Every time we send something out to all the public, when we did our community surveys last year, we sent it out with the utility bills. So that's an important asset to the town. However, the safety net there is that we will be maintaining that because we have to, because of trash. So right now you get one bill that has water, sewer, and trash on it. So the water and sewer will be carved off and that'll be held separately, but we still have to maintain that database for trash collection. So it was a good question, but we will be maintaining that database. Okay, and then some new comments submitted today. This is from Julie Jones. I watched the public hearing about the potential water sale last night, and two questions came to mind. First one, currently homeowners pay a minimum water fee of $33.46 per month, regardless of how much water is used. Will this minimum usage fee be continued, increased, decreased if the water system is sold? So you want to take that one, Casey?
Yep. As I had mentioned earlier, at closing, our proposal is that the town's current rates will be frozen at where they're at right now until our first rate case following the closing of the transaction. So the minimum water fee, she had listed $33.46, and I think that's for 2,000 gallons. Is that right?
Gallons, yeah.
That would remain the same. After the first rate case, what we're proposing to bring into consolidated rate, that yellow line, which is for 3,500 gallon, the minimum fee that we have is really related to a meter fee. It includes 2,000 gallons of usage, so it's a good comparison. That dollar amount for a 5/8" meter is $15, to give you an idea. So if the town of Cape Charles was on our current rates today, the minimum fee for the 2,000 gallons would be $15 versus the $33.46. Again, I try to be fully transparent. The SEC has the ultimate say on how quickly those rates go into our rates, and at the next rate case, I don't know if that will increase or not, but that's where it is today.
Great. Okay, and Julie's second question. Councilman Grossman brought up the question of water meters for ADUs at the Wednesday Water Forum. It seems only fair that if there are two independent housing units on a property, whether one is lived in by an owner and another is rented out, or if both are rented out, that each should have their own water meter, especially in light of the minimum usage fee for water. The two combined might meet or exceed the minimum usage of water for that one meter, but if separated out, might actually use less than the minimum and would avoid paying the minimum usage fee. If the ADU is simply used as an extension of the main house, then one water meter would suffice. And our question is, thoughts on this? So we kind of explained where we are with that on Wednesday. Right now, the town has 1 meter for a property. If someone puts in an ADU, we don't put in a second meter unless it's requested. And Casey, you were going to come back and address that again?
Yeah, I would say that, our operations are fairly consistent with the way that the town is doing things today. If there are two, separate structures on a piece of property, so two homes, we generally do have 2 meters. But my understanding from Councilman Grossman was this is more of a scenario where it might be a garage converted into a living space. So in that instance, it would be 1 meter for us as well. I think the thing that I would add to that, so typically one of the things we do as a company, if you're building a new construction or if you're making a substantial improvement to a facility, we do have engineering resources that are available to help a homeowner understand what size meter that they would need, for that facility. So if you're adding additional, bathrooms and a kitchen, a 5/8" meter might not suffice, right, to get you the adequate flow to make sure everyone has the water for their showers that they would want to run at the same time. So we have a water fixture count sheet that we use as an equation to make sure you have the right size meter. But in terms of separating the service lines, for an additional dwelling unit, we would, we do the same thing the town does.
Okay. And then one last new comment received just from today from Steve Smith. What assurances does the town have that Virginia American Water will place their obligations to the town above their obligations that it owes to its shareholders to increase shareholder profits? Once a sale is approved, Virginia American Water will have a natural monopoly as residents have no other choice where to get their water or who treats their wastewater. Thank you. So, do you want to
I've
jump
already-
in, or do you want me to start?
Yeah, I'll take it. I've talked extensively about the SEC, so you might want to hear it from a different person, so I'm going to give it over to Barry.
Yeah, thanks. I love this one. Mr. Smith correctly points out that we would be a regulated monopoly, I'll add to the word natural. And we have a statement that we use in the regulated utility industry of regulatory compact. And what that means is, as a private company, most private companies are able to set their rates for the product that they create or sell. We give that up, and that is the only charge really related to us of the Virginia State Corporation Commission to set our rates to assure reliable, safe, and reasonable cost service for water and wastewater. So we do operate as a monopoly, but we aren't able to select the rate that we the rate that we charge. We allow them to do that, and that's based on what we call a regulated rate of return. So that's really, the job of the State Corporation Commission to do that. That's the only function that, that they're focused on that. They review every aspect of our business every time we apply for a change in rates. And the only thing I'll add to that is, shareholder profits sounds like, in the context here, maybe some people might think of that as a negative term, but it's the Commission's job to assure that the rates that they set allow for access to capital to assure safe, reliable service for the customers over which they regulate, because nobody wants to have a super cheap, let's say, water or wastewater bill if that means that there might be poor service or even an interruption in service because there wasn't adequate investment. So that's their job to determine that, and they do that. And then the last thing I'll say relative to this comment is that annually we're required to submit what we call an annual information filing at the State Corporation Commission. That filing is actually what internally or general sense we call an earnings test. So they check us each year to assure that we haven't earned more in that last 12 months than what they've told us we can earn in our last rate order. So beyond their setting of the initial rates, there's an annual earnings test that they conduct on the actual records of our company for the year to assure that we're not earning more than what they ordered in their last rate application. So,
And if that were to happen, those dollars go back to the customer, right, through a refund?
yeah, there's several ways that would happen. Sometimes it's a little more complicated than a refund. We sometimes have assets on the book that are called regulatory assets. So they go back to the customer in terms of a writing down of those asset values, right? So if we earn too much, then we have to take those assets that we earn that are regulatory assets and write them off so that we don't collect that money from the customers in a future rate application. So it's like a refund, but it's slightly different. The other option that they have would be to bring the company back in for a rate application to reduce rates, right? They have that power based on an earnings test to say, you know what, you're earning too much. We want you to present a case to determine if your rates are too high now because you're earning in excess of what we authorize. So it's an assurance that we're not putting stakeholder or shareholder profits over customers' interest.
So that's the detailed answer. I'll give the simple answer. What assurance does the town have? That assurance is the SCC. Okay, so the State Corporation Commission is a public body. Okay, that its sole purpose is to look out for the ratepayer. Okay, that's their job. So yes, you no longer have this public body looking out for your water, wastewater. You have a different public body, but it's still a public body. The private corporation can't, as Barry explained, they just can't willy-nilly increase their profits to satisfy their shareholders. They can't. Their profit margin is regulated by the SCC. They can only earn this much, and that's a good thing on both sides, right? Because on our side as a ratepayer, we're guaranteed the minimum amount to keep the system healthy, as Barry explained. On their side, it's also a positive thing because they have a guaranteed rate of return, right? They can plan on it, okay? And so it's mutually beneficial, and that's the way the system is designed to work, and that's the short answer. Mr. Mayor, that was the last of our questions, pre-submitted questions anyway. I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Anybody, the public, have any questions? Any other questions? Julie, you got the mic?
I got one right here.
Lorraine Heckler, I just want to put to bed this issue of Legionella. What wasn't said, and maybe I should have, people with compromised immune systems or who have respiratory issues like asthma or COPD, they are very vulnerable to Legionella. In the town next to my hometown in New Jersey, 50% of the samples in potable water in a residential community were tested positive for Legionella. I don't expect that'll happen here, but in those stagnant areas, I've done an enormous amount of work in the field for testing Legionella because I'm a water expert, and how to grow it and how to kill it. And so I just don't want to be sanguine about it because a Legionellosis infection looks like a COVID infection. It's a respiratory infection. If you test negative for COVID, it might be because the exposure time wasn't enough, or it might be Legionellosis. So I just want to, caution you about ruling out if there's bacterial infections or bacteria present. There's now one field test for Legionella. Takes 45 minutes, and I've been working with it for the last year.
So Lorraine, could I follow up? So I appreciate that. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. Are you satisfied with the answer that Virginia Water gave with regard to how they're going to address this?
I would still like to see a voluntary point of use program in the areas of town that have stagnant. I know that they're taking samples across the distribution center system, but what matters is at that shower head, because that's where the infection occurs.
Okay.
Thank you. Take a bath.
I think
This is for American Water. You stated that you put a $15 million cap on the purchase of the facility. Did that include the Keck well tap when you negotiated this price?
It does. So the purchase price includes all of the assets that the town currently owns, that are needed for the use and operation for both the water and the wastewater plants and distribution system. So it includes the Keck wells.
But
yes.
that is not online at the current time, is it?
It is not online. I believe the town has got a study, that you're working towards right now to look what it's going to take to get it online. But those, assets were put in place, for the long-term growth and support of the operations for the water plant.
Does the town know how much it's going to cost the town to tap into that and get it online?
We have some cost estimates. So the way it would work is, it depends on when this closes. So if this project is in progress, because right now the town is in design to have it done, we're hoping to get it constructed next summer. So this is going to happen while this potentially could be moving forward.
So we don't know how much that's going to cost.
just engineering cost estimates, but we won't know until we put it out to bid what it's actually going to cost. But the value of that will be added to the fair market value of whatever. If the appraisals happen before that happens, then that can be added to the fair market value of.
Okay, I was just wondering how that was going to fit in.
Yeah.
My second question would be, how many appraisers are there in the state that appraise water authorities or, you know?
Yeah, there are a variety of them, and as you can imagine, it is a kind of a specialized
Specialized,
entity, but there are several appraisers out there that have multi-state, licenses on the engineering side and from the appraisal side. We have a handful that we work with on a regular basis, and I think the town has already engaged, a resource that you're looking at, but, I'd hate to put a number on it because I don't actually know that answer.
Okay. It seems to me that there wouldn't be too many in the state that they would be able to get 3 independent appraisers.
Yeah, Casey mentioned most likely some of them won't be actually located within the state of Virginia, but licensed in Virginia, but they work in multiple states doing appraisals. And actually, that's not a bad thing because, water and wastewater systems, having knowledge about them, they're very similar from state to state to state in many ways. And in some other ways, relative to water quality, as Mr. Volk pointed out, they're not. But, there aren't very many of them, you're right. It's not the same as appraisers that you would get for a home you buy, like a real estate appraisal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, before you put your mic down, could you state your name for the record and where you live?
Edward Wells, Strawberry Street, Cape Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells, Julie's got it. When you finish with the mic, look around. If somebody else has got a question, please just hand the mic off to them.
I'm sorry, ignorance or something like that.
What's your name, sir?
Bruce Gettinger. The pipes in the ground, are they considered assets?
They are, yes, sir.
Okay. How old are the pipes in our town?
Yeah, they vary greatly. but-
Okay. Have there been any major renovations on any of those pipes in the recent years? Drinking water was? Okay. Okay. Under the ground? Okay. Because I know when I renovated my house, we had cardboard sewer pipes. The compacted and tar things that apparently were used during World War II. So I'm wondering if some of our main lines are like that too. And what happened on the corner here? What was that about? And
That was a hard stop. It's just a valve. It's been hard stopped so many times, it just blew inside the pipe. It's just, that happens from time to time. The pipe, if you looked at the pipe was still that thick.
yeah, and big lines they do it, and they're always the iron pipes that you mentioned with the rust. That's always right, and that's what I'm concerned about now. And also, the meters. Those containers for the meters are just effectively worthless, so therefore, are our meters actually working properly? Just a question. I guess your analysis of these things would go on, so I'm taking up way more time than I should, but it's just a question that.
And you bring up really good questions, and here's what I would say to that. We have done due diligence. The town of Cape Charles, system in terms of the general condition is like many water utilities across the nation in terms of the meters and the pipes. There's some due diligence that we can do. There's other due diligence that's going to take some time and ownership. And to specifically address your point about the wastewater pipes, one of the first things we do in a wastewater collection system is deploy what we call an I&I crew, inflow and infiltration crew. The first part of their time really is spent cammering, the lines to give us an understanding of, the various types of material that is out there. In those camera inspections, they can also identify low spots in the line that might allow water to set and not flow properly. They can identify root issues, cracks, things like that. Based on those camera inspections and that type of study, it allows us to focus on the areas where we want to replace the lines, basically to reduce the amount of flow that comes into the wastewater treatment plant that is a result of rainwater or other water coming into the pipes. That's important because on water pipes, it's very evident when you have an issue, right? If you have a crack in a water pipe, you have water on the ground, and it becomes, somewhat of a visible concern. On the wastewater side, you oftentimes don't see that in the collection system unless it's backing up and coming out of a manhole, which, we don't want that either. So that's our first thing that we do on a wastewater collection system is, bring in the equipment needed to do that type of inspection. And there'll be some maintenance along the way. We don't wait for that to completely finish before we start projects. If we find major concerns, those are addressed right away. The other issue with the meters, I talked a little bit about, on the last meeting, there was a question asked about the permits and, whether or not those, the withdrawal permits for the water, and if, this sale would have any potential impact on the ability to have the withdrawal permits increased. And I had referenced, one of the things that DEQ looks at when they're considering changing the withdrawal limits is, what type of steward are you of the resources that they currently have allocated to you in your permit? And one of the first metrics they look at is how much unaccounted for water, do you have in your system? So if they give you 100,000 gallons of water a day that you can take out of the ground and you're losing 60,000 gallons of it, why would they give you another 50,000 gallons if you're going to lose 60% of that, as an example? So we place a lot of emphasis on fixing leaks, but the other component of unaccounted for water is sometimes you do have meters that aren't functioning or, aren't registering accurate. You do have, sometimes you have services that aren't metered at all. So we look at those types of things as well. When we come in to a system to make a better judgment on, the dependability of the meters that are there. We have not done that type of due diligence yet because it is, well, for us, we change our meters out every 10 years, proactively. So we will look at the age of water meters, and if they're above that metric, we'll start to change them out. But the other piece of it is, we have a very state-of-the-art meter testing bench in our Alexandria district that we can take a good representation of meters out, send them to get tested, and that builds our confidence that we either need to replace the meters or it builds our confidence that the meters here are registering as we would expect them to do. But there's a lot of things like that that really go into, diving into a system upon those first, couple years of ownership.
Hey, Casey, I got, just to go on what Bruce was just saying, where does your cutoff end for the pipes? He brought a pretty valid point about his sewage pipes were coming out of his house that were either, what was that, terracotta, whatever, cardboard in your case. Do you guys stop at the curb, or where's the responsibility end for you guys? I know where ours does. Ours usually is the curb.
Yeah.
So the curb to the house is the resident.
In ours, in our tariff is the same. If the town's ownership was further, I think that would be something we would talk about if we would maintain that ownership. But since yours is consistent with how we operate, I would say that ours would also be the curb.
Because we had a couple that all of a sudden they moved in and their sewage was never connected. So they had a little mess in their front yard.
So to speak.
Yes. All right, just to clarify, so everybody can sing,
Yep.
so everybody knows.
Can I add something here?
Need the
First of all-
microphone.
You gotta have the mic, you may watch on television.
I'm sorry. And then now we get to when you talked about stuff coming out of the shower. That's personal responsibility. Stops at the line, and we're talking about the stagnant water thing. Houses sits empty for 2-3 months at a time sometimes here in town, So he recommended flush your system when you come in, right? Okay, that applies to those of us who are here all the time anyhow, too. I have a third floor shower that we only use a couple of months, a year, So, but that's a personal responsibility, okay, assuming they do their diligence. That doesn't, is that right?
I didn't hear the.
Bacteria is the water, she said. The source is the water source, for as far as this Legionnaires thing goes.
The regulation I'm aware of is if the water we deliver to the point of sale is, in the case of Legionella and bacteria, free of those things, and they grow within the plumbing system of the customer or owner, that is the responsibility of that customer or owner. It's different for lead and copper, correct? So lead and copper is measured at the point of use in the home, and as a water utility, it's our job to provide water that's not corrosive, such that, the lead in plumbing and piping materials would leach into the water, even though it's plumbing and piping materials that we don't own or have control of. But relative to Legionella and relative to bacteria, if the water entering the service line to a customer's residence or property or facilities is free of that bacteria, that Legionella, then what happens beyond that is the responsibility of the owner of that property. We have some really good materials available on our website about Legionella, because to your point, it's a really important thing for people to understand. It's very significant. Hot water heaters are a problem relative to Legionella. So we have some good advice on our webpage on how to deal with it. And I think it is important for people to understand it and manage their own facilities correctly. But I just wanted to make sure to clarify, there is a little difference between the way lead and copper is regulated than there is between the bacteria.
And also, just to kind of point out, like a point of clarification, what we're really here for is to talk about, how our company can enhance upon the things that the town is currently doing. And I don't want it to be a misunderstanding that we're proposing to do something differently from what the town is doing that would make that risk worse. I'm hoping that the answer is that we give, established confidence that, we're going to maintain the work that the town has done, and through our additional technology and testing and our engagement at a national level, maybe able to even improve on that. But I wanted to make that point as well.
Adam Charney, Harbor Avenue. I just wanted to find out, go back to the Keck wells. If they do go online before the sale, does that 15 million then possibly increase?
No, the 15 million is a maximum sales price. It could affect the FMV if it's below 15 million.
Ken Buda, Mason Avenue. You talked about conducting a survey of needs once if you take control of the company, of everything. Will this be a public document so we would all know, here are where the issues are that you see in town that would need to be improved on?
And I'll let Barry confirm this, but the capital planning study, since it's going to be presented to the town council for prioritization, I'm assuming those projects would be public, but.
Yeah, I think that the real answer to that is through the governance process you have with your elected leaders in town here, that absolutely they'll be public. You'll be able to see what they see and look at the priorities that we set and see the outcome of what we found. There are some documents that we will use in engineering design and study that are protected by Homeland Security, as you might imagine.
Sure.
So those won't be public and won't be available for folks to see because, frankly, they're to protect the customers from, somebody bad getting that information and using it to, potential harm. But by and large, you'll be able to see what is presented to council and the priorities that we set and the comments the council has relative to them.
The other question I had was, we talked about connection fees. Would you anticipate that the connection fees you would charge would be about what we currently charge.
And I'm trying to remember,
It would be significantly less.
yeah, that's what I was
So- so-
thinking.
So with their, right now, we collect money for the actual connection and the reserve, okay? They're only going to charge for the actual connection. So the money that we're collecting for future expansion, they don't need to do that.
Good question.
Anybody else?
Anybody has any more questions? Council have any questions or comments?
I don't.
No? Thank y'all, from Virginia American Warden. Thank y'all, public, for attending. Some really good questions brought up again today. There's some really good questions Wednesday. So thank y'all, thank you, John, for all you've done. And with that being said, can I get a?
Oh, I have-
Oh, I do have
Yeah,
to say.
what next steps that, we didn't talk about that today, did we? Like when's the public, I
Yeah,
can't
I
remember,
did.
you did?
I did, but it doesn't
I
hurt
was
to
like,
say, it doesn't
what
hurt to
day
say
was
it
that?
again. So the next step is a public hearing on
Yes.
November 10th.
November 10th.
So there is
Yeah.
still another opportunity to weigh in
Yeah.
on November 10th during the formal public hearing. And the council is currently scheduled to then have a special meeting after the public hearing to formally consider this matter.
Sorry, I just,
Before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I do want to make a note that Vice Mayor Bennett had to leave for an emergency, so he's not with us right now for this motion. But anyway, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
second,
All in favor?
aye.
Opposed? Thank you all very much.